This past week, I lost a good friend, Father John Horgan. Most people probably have heard it, at least those who are in touch with Catholic news here in the Archdiocese. As I watched him slip away due to cancer, two sentiments were swirling in my mind and heart. One is that I knew I would miss him a lot. Once he was dead, I wouldn't be able to talk to him, rather obvious, get advice, have him correct my letters, which he did often, especially when I wrote to certain people in the Archdiocese. I'd always send them to him, and he would modify them for me, and he was much better at words than I can ever be. And even when the opportunity afforded itself to have a drink together, obviously he would be gone. And when you're gone, you're gone. At the same time, I was sincerely filled with joy because I had a certitude as to where he was going. Father John Horgan was a good man, strove or tried to be a good man, and a good priest who loved God, loved the church, and really tried to serve the people that were entrusted to his care with all the gifts that he had. And he was a very gifted individual. It was when the time came for him to die, he was, and this added to my joy, he was what I call sacramentally loaded when he left this world, because he had received communion almost every day, anointings, apostolic blessings, and prayers. I thought to myself, when my time comes, I hope God permits me in his mercy to die like this, because it is a mercy. It's nothing is sure in life. Even if we try to set it up and we're very structured and we try to determine how things are going to be, if you just have any wisdom, you know that it can just go astray just like that. All the best plans of mice and men, as the old saying goes, they don't always materialize. So I pray that God in his mercy and his love for me will permit me to have that when my time comes. This sincerely brought joy to my heart and continues to bring joy to me, but also this, I know I'm going to miss him. I do miss him. And these two things actually coexist, and how they coexist in one's life it is a mystery to me. I mean, the only answer I have when I reflect on this is grace, or Jesus Christ. Jesus is able to hold these two things coexisting within our own hearts. We can miss somebody. It depends on who you are, because we all have our own way of expressing loss and sorrow and grief. You may have tears or you may not. Just because you don't shed tears doesn't mean you're not having deep sorrow about someone who's died. And joy. Only Jesus, as far as I'm aware of, can actually hold these things in existence together. As I pored over the readings this past week and I watched my friend waste away, St. Paul's reading, the second reading, came to mind. And this is one of my favorite statements of St. Paul, because he's coming to the end of his life, and this guy's like a spiritual titan. He's like a warrior for Christ. I mean, this guy's been through the battlefield, spiritually speaking. And he knows what's going to happen to him. Like, he's going to lose his head. He knows what the Romans do. Now, he's going to have his head cut off rather than be crucified, because he's a Roman citizen. And at the end of his life, near the end of his life, he writes this: I've run the race, I've finished the course, I've kept the faith. Now, from human ears, from a natural plane, you'd say this guy's bonkers. But if you understand that he was a man of deep faith, and if you take your faith seriously, you would say, I hope I can say those words when my time comes. I have run the race, I've finished the course. Like, I've finished the marathon. This, for a Christian life, is like a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. And I've kept the faith. Like, this is it. This is what it's all about. I've kept the faith. And so was Paul looking forward to having his head severed from his body? No. But was he looking forward to seeing Jesus Christ? Yes. And, to see Jesus meant to keep the faith, not to deny Christ. And so these two things can coexist in our life. When it comes to the race, we can, and in fact, we have to begin the race. If you don't actually start the race, then there's not going to be a race. Rather obvious. You can run the race. And it's necessary, of course, you start the race, you have to run the race. Otherwise, there's no race. No race. Well, and the third thing is you can start the race, you can run the race, but if you don't finish it, you all athletes, you know this, especially the runners here. If you don't, you can start it, you can run it, but if you don't finish it, it's all in vain. Even if you come in last, if you did your best, then at least you know in your heart you did your best. But you see, in the next life, everybody who crosses the finish line wins eternal life. In this world, only one can actually be gold, and then it's silver, bronze, and whatever. I don't know how they categorize them today, but that's what they did in my generation. How do we finish, though, as I reflected on his life coming to an end? How can we finish the course? How can we keep the faith? How do we persevere? And there's lots of things involved in this. I'm going to focus on one. So I can assure you I could list a number of 5 or 10 things, but I want to focus just on one. If we look at the readings this Sunday, we're presented with the necessity of talking with God. Jesus actually spends a great deal of time, if you glean the scriptures, if you glean the New Testament, talking to us, teaching us about prayer. As I said last week, he never gives a method. He never gives a technique, but he gives all the internal, what I call the internal guts of prayer that are necessary if we're going to pray. Now, he's the ultimate motivator. I can try to motivate somebody, I can try to inspire them, but I cannot give them transformative power to pray. Jesus can give you transformative power to pray. But even then, it all boils down to the fact that you have to want to do it. You have to want it. Nothing in the universe can supply or replace the reality that at some point you have to want to do it. You have to be willing to do it. So back to the Pharisee and the publican. Now, the publican, it doesn't really deliver the punch that it would have in Jesus' day. I want you to think drug dealer. Because the publicans were hated like in our day a drug dealer would be hated. Because it's far worse than the poor individual who's addicted to narcotics. But the drug dealer, like I won't use colorful adjective, but they're the worst of the worst. All right, so think drug dealer. This guy is not a nice person. So the Pharisee could be a priest or a religion teacher who's supposed to be really good. So it seems to be talking to God. He starts off with God, but it very quickly revolves around what I'm doing. I. He's basically taking credit for everything he's doing. The drug dealer, who has led a very bad life, done lots of horrible things, actually brought a lot of people into sin. He's ruined lives. Something has happened to him, and he's had this moment of conversion or grace offered to him, and he realizes that he doesn't deserve anything that God can offer him. He doesn't deserve anything. In fact, he deserves to go to hell for what he's done. And people actually, they feel that based on some of the things they've done. But something has touched him to actually beseech, that is to beg God for mercy. Lord, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. And he won't even look to heaven. It's like, I deserve nothing. I'm begging you. I have nothing. I'm totally impoverished. I'm asking you for mercy. Now, obviously, the presumption here, the assumption is that this is genuine. You can't play games with God. We can voice the words. We can fool other people, maybe, although that usually wears thin pretty quick. But we can never fool God. So, presumably, his prayer is genuine. So he humbles himself and just speaks from his heart. He has nothing else left. This is prayer in its finest and purest form. He doesn't look to, what am I going to say? He just says what comes to him, like, be merciful to me. I deserve to go to, he's not saying these exact words, but it's in the content of his words. I deserve to go to hell. I don't deserve anything. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve anybody. I've done horrible things in my life. Please be merciful to me, a sinner. That is prayer in its rawest form. Our danger might be the temptation, and when we look at these two individuals, to thank God that we're not like the Pharisee. The Pharisee is looking down at the drug dealer, the religion teacher or priest is looking down at the drug dealer and thinking, well, I don't do that. I don't do those horrible things. I just do a little this, a little that on the side, but I don't do that. And that can be a temptation we fall into very easily. Examine yourself. How you sometimes pitch yourself against another individual. We will elevate ourselves to kind of diminish our own sinfulness. We can elevate ourselves. It's not as bad as that. And when you do that, catch yourself. And Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. Catch yourself. So we can do this because perhaps I'm talking to the choir here because you're all here in church, including myself. So we can do that. We can begin to think this way almost unconsciously because I go to Mass. I offer Mass every day. I go to confession. I even go regularly or even often. And I even pray. And I even try to pray every day. So life is L-I-G, life is good. You know, life is good. I don't have really much to confess, I don't know what to say when I go to confession. Come to me and I'll help you out. Outside of the confessional, I'll help you out. I've been in the box for 35 years. I know all the dust, the little ones, that you don't have to commit a mortal sin, to irritate a lot of people. I can assure you. But we don't think of these things. Or even the fact that we should be paying attention to God, praying. You say, well, yeah, I forgot to pray, and maybe I haven't prayed in a long time. I'll say, well, okay, that's good. I'm glad you're saying that, but what would happen if that was your wife or your husband? Like, things wouldn't be so goody, would they? Because that's when you start separating yourself, or you feel a little more distant, you feel dry in your relationship. It's like things are not where they should be. You got to do the check-ins. Technical term, but all know what I mean. At the end of the day, you got to be talking, downloading to each other. How did your day go? Because people are busy, but never let busy be an excuse. And that's what it is. It's an excuse. We can be caught off guard, but eventually, if we're not careful, it becomes an excuse for the fact that I don't have time to talk. Ask yourself if you would be uncomfortable starting your prayer with, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. It's a good way to start prayer. Lord, I love you. You can say, you don't have to say start with those precise words, but Lord, I love you, I adore you, but, be merciful to me, a sinner. And it's not like me wearing it on my sleeve, or I'm not trying to exaggerate or be this Mr. Goody Two-Shoes or Mrs. Goody Two-Shoes by acknowledging that I'm a sinner. I'm serious. Lord, you know that I am a sinner. It doesn't mean that I necessarily have mortal sin, or I'm even trying to fight off conscious or deliberate venial sins. What it means is I acknowledge the fact that I am infected by sin. And if I don't continually ask you to help me, if I don't continually beseech you for your grace, for your strength, for your forgiveness, I will fall away. I will not fall towards. That's what happens because of the weakness in our will and the clouding of our intellect. So we tend to do this in terms of our relationship with God. You know what I'm doing, right? I'm falling away. Rather than this. We have to fight to do this. We don't have to fight to do this. Just stop doing what you're trying to do. And your fallen human nature will take care of itself. It'll tend to go to the lazy, go to the whatever it wants. It doesn't take very long for us to see these things happen in our life. That's kind of getting at what we mean when we say, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. I have a defect in my system because of original sin. It's made worse by my own personality and my own personal specific weaknesses. And if I don't fight against this every single day, it will take over. It's kind of like a lawn that if during the summer, if you don't constantly weed it, the dandelions come up. I mean, that's the way it is. So this may lead you to think, if you're not careful, like I said a minute ago, L-I-G, life is good. Maybe I don't have all that many sins, to confess. It's a trap of self-reliance that the Pharisee, religion teacher, priest, fell into in today's gospel. The key to perseverance is asking God for mercy. Asking him for mercy, and doing this in the context of prayer, sincere prayer. When this is done with sincerity, it actually fuels perseverance. It helps us to persevere. It's kind of like when two people are constantly making time for each other, perhaps the only time they have when the day is nearing its end, and they're making time for each other, over a period of time, they should recognize that's actually what fuels their relationship. They're off doing their things during the day, but when they come together at night, how did your day go? The ups and downs, the good and the negative, the challenges and so on, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes or half an hour, in a good relationship, you can actually speak about quite a bit. That actually is what fuels the closeness, the intimacy in a friendship. And all the experts talk about this. And when that's not there, it actually, if it's not attended to, it can actually lead to a very sour marriage or a flat relationship, or perhaps even in the worst case, divorce. And the same thing happens in our relationship with God. God delights when we acknowledge that we are spiritually impoverished. Remember, the way Jesus starts the Beatitudes is very intentional. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. To be poor in spirit is not monetary poverty. Rather, it's going before God and saying, I don't have anything. Even if I'm very wealthy, I've got a good job, I've got good standing in life, I've got a great family. When I go before you, Lord, I have to recognize that everything I have comes from you, even though I've worked hard to acquire it. My degrees or my position, my prestige in life, all of it really is because you have blessed me. You have given me your gift of grace, and I need to be very thankful for that. If you read the Bible, as I'm trying to over and over and over again, you recognize that every time Israel, who's blessed by God, the nation, forgets to be thankful to the Lord, they fall right down the sink. They go right down the sink. Every time they're grateful to God and keep up their relationship with him, he blesses them with all sorts of prosperity, spiritual first and then even material. Like St. Paul, we're all living day to day. But hopefully, like St. Paul, we are keeping the end in mind, hopefully journeying towards heaven, as I have no doubt my friend was striving to do every day of his life. And like St. Paul, we need to pray for the grace, the gift from God to persevere one day at a time, asking for his mercy. How do we do this? Well, as I said, I would focus on one thing. I mentioned last week that we need to pray. When it comes right down to it, just do it. I'm not sure how to substitute, encouragement or, building people up or trying to inspire people. At some point, we just have to do it. Have to try it and be willing to continue the practice, because nobody will make us do this. I don't pretend it's easy, but it is possible. One specific call to action, to get even more specific, when I say just pray, because there's lots of different kinds of prayers. How do what about time? Whatever time works for you. I'm an early bird, like grossly early, so I pray in the morning. Some people, the morning is purgatory, so the best time for them to pray is at night, whatever works. I'm talking not just the rosary, I'm talking meditation. We need a quiet time with God, and 15 minutes. And to actually slot it in, if you have to, put it into your schedule. 15 minutes each day. And be with God. And if you stick to this, like your relationship with your spouse or a really good friend, if you stick with this and you make time for each other, then you will find that it is possible, and how it's possible, to persevere to the end.